This next story is interesting, and it's nice to see a man taking a stand. Male student takes stand against toxic masculinity narrative. Oh boy, he's going to fail. I see all F's in his future. Okay. Jermel McLeod is a man, and he's not going to apologize for it. Okay? The San Diego San Diego, of course. State University freshman and budding philosopher. Oh no, I'm a philosopher, pal. I'm going to have to pay extra careful attention to everything you say and pick it apart with fine, very, very fine tweezers and a microscope. Recently took to the pages of the campus newspaper, the Daily Aztec, and let the world know what he thinks of the term toxic masculinity and those who wield it. Toxic masculinity doesn't exist, he wrote in his op-ed. Traits that one person considers toxic may not be toxic to another person. The entire phrase is based on a subjective scale with absolutely no objective ground and is used as a shaming tactic for modern feminists. You mean by modern feminists and anybody else buying into their horrible rhetoric. For example, one person may like the typical alpha male. McLeod wrote, confident, loud, powerful, buff, etc. I don't know about loud. I think confident applies. Powerful doesn't have to be buff. Okay? Don't need to be buff and built to be alpha. Okay? It's a state of mind more than anything else, and just not giving a fuck and being secure and confident who you are, not needing validation from others. And the loud, I don't see that being a necessity. But again, though, he's in college. He's around a bunch of guys who seem like alpha males, and they're all very loud and boisterous as they suck down lots of fucking beer. So, okay, I can see where he might get that idea. But another person may find those traits unlikable, and so they'll brand that male as toxic because toxic masculinity is a catch-all term for any traits a man has that are considered unlikable or overly masculine. Yeah, I agree. The problem is, by shaming men on a completely subjective scale, you intimidate, which is exactly what the left and most feminists want. They want to intimidate the men that go against the grain and reject the weak and feminized version of men you see portrayed everywhere. I believe there are toxic people, but to make an entire term for men and to keep cramming it down the throats of men is biased, bigoted, and a result of brainwashing. Some of this don't make sense. Most feminists, they want to intimidate the men that go against the grain and reject the weak and feminized version of men you see portrayed everywhere. No, it seems like they want men to be. Okay, maybe there's a mistake here in his typing. Feminists want men to become more feminized and weak, even though deep down, when they actually get with such a man, they will resent him and reject him at that point. Maybe that's what he's talking about at a deeper fundamental level. Anyway, a toxic person can be defined as somebody that is poisonous to you or society. Right? Toxic people can be any gender, male, female, or non-binary. Uh-oh. He's using leftist terms. I'm concerned. So why do we have an entire term for men? Because society's become gynocentric and matriarchal in nature, and women are running things, not men. And they don't just want to run things, they want to take over. And they just want ever more power. Okay? And they've been weaponized by the left and by the global elites to destroy men as much as possible, to make them as weak and subservient as possible. That's why the shaming tactics never end. We have so many people talking about toxic masculinity, but so few talking about toxic femininity. Amen to that, brother. Toxic femininity. You have women talking about how, feminists, and some of the dopey male feminists who want to get some poon, talking about how people are all a blank slate. We're all the same. There's nothing fundamentally different about any of us. Uh-huh. So if there's such a thing as toxic masculinity, isn't there such a thing as toxic femininity? No! Because all the shit that's centered around what makes a man and what makes a woman is all stereotypical in a social construct, and the social constructs themselves are not necessarily equal, so they are different. They're different in that way. But at the fundamental level, we're not different in any way, shape, or form. I see. Well, if that's the case, and if there ever was actually a patriarchy, or if there still is, as you claim there is, why would men give themselves the short end of the stick? Why would they choose something that's harmful and dangerous to them and society? Why would they create this social construct, this stereotypical male, and all these traits that go along with being male? Why would they adopt all of these traits if they're harmful to them and others? If it's all about male privilege, and we're supposedly the ones that are privileged, and that would mean we're the ones creating all the narratives, creating all the stereotypes, why would we create this stereotypical male persona for ourselves that's harmful to everybody and most harmful to us? I don't get it. And at the same time, give women all the traits that are best and in no way toxic. It doesn't make any sense. When you're in a privileged position, you do everything to benefit as much as humanly possible. I don't get this. How does taking on a toxic persona and toxic traits and making them part of what it means to be a man, how does that help us? How does that benefit men? It makes no sense. Anyway, McLeod, in an interview this week with the College Fix, said he has no regrets about talking on the controversial topic. I argue that it doesn't really exist, he said in an interview, because it's used so much that the term no longer has any objective meaning. It never had any. You saying that, okay, implies that it existed in the first place, or that it does actually exist, but the meaning has been taken away by it being talked about so much. It never existed, son. There's no such thing as toxic masculinity. It's total, utter bullshit. It's literally just something that's used for the sake of shaming. So that's why I think it doesn't really exist. You just said it. See, you got a long way to go to earn your philosophical chops, young man. You just said it existed, and now you're saying it doesn't. If you say it's used so much that the term no longer has objective meaning, that's you saying that it did at one time have objective meaning, and now you're saying it doesn't exist. Yeah. I hope he's not a philosophy student. Because if he's a philosophy student, he's going to come out of college way dumber than he is now. It's been stretched out so much that it's gone. His byline discussing male behavior and characteristics has been featured on the Good Men Project website with headlines such as Free Will, How Men Can Steer Clear of Society's Outdated Expectations, and Lessons from a Man on the Road. You're not a man yet, son, I'm sorry. How can a man live life without worrying about what someone else thinks of him? It's easy. Don't give a fuck. It's not that difficult, pal. All right? His musings are also published on Medium. As for his decision to breach toxic masculinity in the pages of the Daily Aztec, never heard of it, it was a buildup of things, he told the Fix. It was a mixture of the leftist pressure on campus, he said. It was a mixture of the fact that the APA is pretty much saying that anything that is not feminine is toxic. Yeah. McLeod was referring to a decision earlier this year by the American Psychological Association to offer guidelines calling traditional masculinity harmful. I've been saying for years and years that psychology is bunk. It's nothing more than a fucking pseudoscience. It's right about a third of the fucking time when predicting outcomes. That's not a science. It's barely a pseudoscience, okay? It doesn't have very much predictive power. And most importantly, he added, it was the fact that any man who goes against the grain is shamed for doing so. So they lose their sense of individuality and they're forced to succumb to the nonsense that the left is putting out. Look, okay, I'm going to have to, what he's saying here is very vague. I get what he's trying to say to a certain extent, but he's being very vague and very generalized. He's not really saying much here that has any meaning. First of all, individuality isn't all it's cracked up to be, okay? You should be an individual, and you should have a strong sense of self. And that comes from having a mother and a father who raise you right and, let you find your own way, encourage you in your interests, and essentially they let you grow and they encourage this and they do a good job, right? They don't spoil you. At the same time, they don't give too much discipline. Find a happy medium. Encourage you in your life. Act as protectors and, shepherd you into adulthood. And hopefully, by that point, you'll have a strong sense of self. But beyond that, radical individuality, which is this sense that collectives of all kinds are bad, well, that's an idea of the left, okay? That the left pushes on the right to stop them from collectivizing, while at the same time the left collectivizes. Collectives aren't all bad, okay? You can have collectives of individuals, by the way. Individuals with a strong sense of individuality can come together to combat a common enemy, to champion a specific cause. Their collectivization comes under the banner of the umbrella of that specific cause. It doesn't make them a collective or collectivist who essentially identify a sense of self by their belonging to a collective. There's different types of collectives, and I think people don't really explore this subject enough. They misunderstand what the idea of a collective is, and they associate it with socialism and leftism and losing your sense of identity and self, and that's not always true. Not always true. Anyway, McLeod will not be shamed even in the face of backlash. He said his column prompted an angry letter to the editor and more. There was obviously that whole letter to the editor, which was a response. Okay, I'm going to move on here. Some boring shit here. McLeod said people called him negative names. Negative names. I bet they did. And compared him to Vice President Mike Pence. So what? What's wrong with that? Wait. Is this about that comment Pence made that he didn't want to spend time alone with a woman who wasn't his wife because it could get him in trouble? What's wrong with that? What's wrong with that? I don't see a problem with that. Another wrote that his work would be in a manifesto for a school shooter. That makes no sense. That's not an argument. It's just an insult. And, if that's the first thing you say, you have no arguments. I don't even have to pay attention to what you say. But on the flip side, there was actually more positives than negatives. A lot of people told him, finally, somebody said it. A lot of kids were surprised that somebody was willing to actually say it. I found out that mostly, even if they didn't like what I had to say, they still liked that I said it anyway. Okay. Asked why he thinks masculinity is under attack. He said it's an attack on individualism. Yeah, I don't know about that. I don't agree with that. Masculinity is under attack because masculinity is what makes people defend themselves, okay? Masculinity is... Now, of course, I think perhaps what he's trying to say is... I don't know what he's trying to say. I don't agree with that blanket statement he just made. I don't believe it's necessarily an attack on individuality. I think it is to weaken men, to make them less willing and less able to defend their mother country and their fellow citizens, and thereby wonderful global utopian socialism can commence. Anyway, masculinity is the application of 4 traits, he says: courage, mastery, honor, and strength. It's under attack because all those things are inherently individualistic. Okay. And they go against a lot of what is being preached nowadays. He's making a lot of absolute statements here that I don't necessarily agree with. And he's not really going into much detail and trying to explain himself. He's just making a lot of grand sweeping statements that I don't necessarily agree with. And his approach and his proclamations don't show very much strength, philosophically speaking, in regards to the underpinnings of his claims. But anyway, I'm not going to go into that now. That would require a whole nother video. And it goes, okay, it's all under attack because all these things are inherently individualistic, and they go against a lot of what is being preached nowadays, which is fearfulness, sensitiveness, timidity, and it's the exact opposite of what's being pushed right now. And he's pushing back, even in class. The teachers usually just nod in silence. The students kind of raise their eyebrows and look at me weird. At the end of the day, it's a broken narrative because it's a misunderstanding of what masculinity is, McLeod said. Nowadays, masculinity seems to be mixed with sexual assault on campus, so most people immediately assume that masculinity is the cause of all these rapes and whatnot. Yeah, correlation does not equal causation. Even though it's not, it's a misunderstanding of masculinity that cause all of these issues. Well, the misunderstanding comes from a narrative that comes directly from the global elites, from the half-baked intellectuals that came out of the 60s and 70s, all of these, fucking professors that came out of the hippie days, and they're all a bunch of socialist scumbags who think that Marx was a genius, and they push the idea of cultural Marxism and the oppressor versus oppressed, and that's really all feminism is. And, of course, you need an oppressor, and who's the oppressor? Well, the evil white male. Yeah. So identify everything about the male that is masculine, that, that's got to be it. That's got to be it. The very nature of what a man is what is evil. Yes, and that's his masculinity. And that has to be destroyed, because without that, well, he can't really fight back against us very effectively now, can he? So everything just stems from this misunderstanding of what makes a man, and what masculinity is. I disagree with a lot of the specific points he tried to make, referencing certain character traits as this or that, inherently bound to individualism or what have you. And he's wrong on a number of points here, but I applaud his message, or he's just making too many absolute claims, absolute statements, and not getting into enough finer detail. But those are small points in my mind compared to what he's actually arguing. Although his arguments would make a lot more sense if he was on the money about what he's talking about especially in regards to why this is happening. It's not an attack on individualism. Trust me. They want you to be more of an individual. They want you to be radically individualistic so that you will not in any way, shape, or form collectivize. Okay? You ever heard divide and conquer? It's a very, very old tactic. Divide your enemies, they're easy to conquer. Million men against a million men, odds are pretty even depending on the individual skills of those people in that group of a million and how well they work together to coordinate their efforts. Now, if you take those same men and you put them 100 feet apart along a line, still a million of them, but now they're standing more or less alone, and the other force is nice and congealed and conglomerated, and they attack the one man. And there's a million of them, the one man is going to fall, and down the domino line you go until all 1 million of those men are dead because they stood alone as radical individuals. Okay? So individualism and radical individualism, what this kid seems to be talking about to a certain extent, is dangerous. Because if you push radical individualism to the point where you reject any type of collectivization coming together to fight a common foe, for example, guess what happens? You're unable to fight. Because the left, they've got no problem coming together and collectivizing. Well, what about that? What was that? Anybody out there seen that footage in Portland of Antifa? They've got that radical, leftist, communist mayor who got himself elected, and he might be Antifa himself, and he essentially just commands the cops to stand down. Remember that video where you had all these fat, ugly, stupid, leftist, male feminist pinheads directing traffic for no reason whatsoever? You gotta remember that one fat lady is telling this guy to go right, and he's like, why? And she's like, because I should show. He's like, what? And then some guy comes over and starts calling this poor 70-year-old man an evil white male and kicking his car and shit. And then he tells him, and he's like, yeah, whatever. And he tries to go his own way, and they chase his car and start kicking it and shit. Nobody did anything. I was sitting there watching that tape, and I was like, what's going on here? This is not the America I know. The America I know, everybody standing on those street corners would have just flown to that one point, that car, and protected that old man and beat the shit out of these radical leftist nut jobs. And protected that old man. But nobody did anything. Everybody just stood there terrified, alone, divided, unable to come together in any way, shape, or form, in any collective manner to fight their enemy. That's the problem. Radical individualism. At the same time, the left pushes radical collectivism to stand in for an actual sense of identity, of self, for those on the left. It at the same time pushes radical individualism on the right, on those who are inherently more collectivist and individualistic in nature. Well, it just pushes this radical individualism on them to further radicalize them along the lines that they were already naturally inclined to follow to begin with. So those who are radical individuals who are individuals become more radicalized along lines of individualism, and they become ever less able to fight back in any real meaningful way because they can't come together. They can't come together. The most they can do is be some kind of talking head on a YouTube video. And I'm not a radical individual, okay? Believe me. I understand the necessity of collectivization at times, depending on what you're collectivizing around and for what purpose. But yeah, you see like that, what's his name? Sargon dude who's running for office in UK. I mean, he goes out to try and talk to people. He has a hard time finding people to help him, essentially, and to collectivize around him, and who essentially will speak up for the values that he's representing and saying that he will push for as a UKIP representative, as a UK representative. And the majority of the people who are causing problems and have the loudest voices are the ones that have embraced a collectivist ideal. For the wrong reasons, but it gives them much more strength, much more power. The people that can come together and collectivize for whatever cause they might be fighting for, they're going to be the ones to win. And that's one of the reasons why the left has been so effective to date.